Well, this will be our last study in the book of Ruth for now anyways. And the title of this morning's lesson is Ruth Marries Boaz. But I think before we get into that of our lesson, we need to go back to Ruth chapter 3 and read about what leads up to this marriage and what takes place. There's some things that happens, and God hasn't forbade any of these things, but for me and my thinking, it's a little bit forward. But God tells us how Ruth is a virtuous woman and Boaz is a godly man, and so everything that took place was up and above board. But let's look at chapter 3. We'll read through it. And my title in my Bible says, Naomi seeks redemption for Ruth. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee? Or she was seeking a place of a home for her, or a place of safety. That it may be well with thee. And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor, but make not thyself known unto the man, until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be when he lieth down that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down. And he will tell thee what thou shalt do. And she said unto her, All that thou sayest unto me I will do. And she went down unto the floor, and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn. And she came softly and uncovered his feet, and laid her down. And it came to pass at midnight that the man was afraid, and turned himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, Who art thou? And she answered, I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. And he said, Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followest not young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. And now it is true that I am thy near kinsman, howbeit there is a kinsman nearer than I. Tarry this night, and it shall be in the morning, that if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, well, let him do the kinsman's part. But if he will not do the part of a kinsman to thee, then will I do the part of a kinsman to thee, as the Lord liveth. Lie down until morning. And she lay at his feet until the morning, and she rose up before one could know another. And he said, Let it not be known that a woman came into the floor. Also he said, Bring the veil that thou hast upon thee, and hold it. And when she held it out, he measured 6 measures of barley, and laid it on her. And she went into the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, Who art thou, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done to her. And she said, These 6 measures of barley gave he me, for he said to me, Go not empty unto thy mother-in-law. Then said she, Sit still, my daughter, until thou know the matter will fall. Until thou know how the matter will fall. For the man will not be in rest until he have finished the thing this day. This is Naomi giving instructions to her daughter-in-law as she was trying to find a home for her and a time of peace within her life. And the things she tells her to do, as I mentioned before, it seems pretty forward to me, but it was a way that they did back in Israel's time. And she told Ruth that she needed to wash herself and put on ointment and dress nicely. And isn't that the way we used to go on dates? You know, we used to do the best we could to dress up and look nice and be presentable. And so Naomi tells this to her daughter-in-law that she might find a husband. And anyways, why Ruth says, I will do all that thou sayest. And she did and followed all the instructions that Naomi had given to her. And she went in and, of course, she had to wait till the nighttime came. And she said, wait till Boaz gets done eating and drinking and he's feeling well, and mark the spot where he lies, and then you go in later and lie down by his feet. And she did this, and evidently Boaz didn't wake up until, it says here, at midnight. He woke up, and he was somewhat startled and befuddled because he knew there was someone else there. And he knew when he laid down there wasn't. And so he asks who it was, and Ruth says, it's your handmaid. And so he tells her of her kindness, that she was interested in him rather than one of the young fellows that worked for him. And she could have followed after any one of them probably, but she had chose Boaz as to that she wanted him to be her husband. And so Boaz tells her, yes, I am your kinsman, but there's one that's closer kinsman than I am. And he tells her then that to stay there for the rest of the night. You know, I'd have thought maybe he would have wanted her to get back home and to get away from the threshing floor where people might talk, but he was concerned too for her safety going out in the night. And so he just told her to lie down there on the floor by his feet. And then in the morning, she was to go back home. So when morning came, it was before daylight, though, that Ruth gets up, and she was going to go out before she would be able to be seen or to be recognized. And even though she was a virtuous woman, she was being careful. Boaz, too, was being careful, for he was a godly man, but all people don't see things the same way we do. And people like to talk. And I'm sure back there in Bethlehem, people then like to talk also. And so she was careful that she went out and went back home before daylight. But before she did, why, Boaz gave her barley to take to her mother-in-law. He was still being kind to her and was taking care of both of them. And so when Ruth gets back home to Naomi's place, why, Naomi said, well, what happened? And I'm sure she was probably up and waiting on her to see what took place. And Ruth gives her the news and tells her that, will you just wait here and sit here today? And she was understanding that Boaz would take care of this matter. He wouldn't, sometimes when there's matters come up, if it's not real pressing, I tend to want to put them off a little bit, maybe even think about it for a while. But Naomi knew that Boaz would take care of this in that day. So she tells her, you just stay right here until we hear of what the outcome is. And so we have that in the preparation of Ruth being married to Boaz. Now, how did you think? Did you read this part of the lesson? Did you think too that Naomi was she pushing a little bit for this marriage to take place?
I think she was pushing both Boaz and Ruth.
Boaz knew he was a kinsman, and he had a responsibility, and I think he probably knew that. But so far in our reading, we haven't read that he knew he should do something about it. So I think Naomi was bringing it to his attention that something needs to be done. And now I'm not sure, it doesn't tell us in the scriptures whether Naomi knew there was another kinsman that was closer than Boaz. But there was. And of course, Boaz knew this. And in fact, one writer spoke that possibly Boaz would have been a nephew, and that this other kinsman would have been a brother to Elimelech. But there's nothing in the scriptures that tell us that or relate to that, so we don't know any of that. But there was a kinsman that was closer than what Boaz was, and Boaz was going to talk with him and to see what the situation would be. If we would go to Deuteronomy chapter 25, it tells us some things that about a kinsman redeemer and what they did. And John said last week I was going to tell you about a kinsman redeemer. And of course, a kinsman we know is a relative. And when we know here that Boaz was a relative, but yet there was one that was closer than him, there was responsibilities that they were to do for those who, widows that did not have a husband or did not have children to raise up seed and their name after them. And if we go to Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 through 10, it tells us there, if brethren dwell together, and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her. And it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother, which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. And if the man like not to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate unto the elders, and say, My husband's brother refuseth to raise up unto his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak unto him, and if he stand to it, and say, I like not to take her, then shall his brother's wife come unto him in the presence of the elders, and loose his shoe from off his foot, and spit in his face, and shall answer and say, So shall it be done unto that man that will not build up his brother's house. Sounds pretty erratic, but that was just the way that they did things at that time. And so here we have Boaz then, that he was going to go find this nearest kinsman to see if he was going to be a redeemer to Ruth and to Naomi. So that takes us into our lesson then in chapter 4. Then went Boaz up to the gate. This is the next morning when it got daylight. It makes me think that Boaz must have been some person in the town of Bethlehem that was a fairly important guy, that he would go up into the gate and sit there. And well, we'll go on and read the rest of it here. Then went Boaz up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the kinsman with whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one. You notice here, his name is Such a One. That's quite a name to have, isn't it? Such a one. Well, I think there's more to it than that. Because of what is going to transpire, this person is not named. And I think that is God's way of not naming this person, because he did not accept the responsibilities that was his to be a kinsman redeemer. And so his name is not ever mentioned in the scriptures. We do not know who it was. And of course they knew, but we only know him as being such a one. He said, Turn aside and sit down. And he turned aside and he sat down, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Sit ye down here. And they sat down. Now this is Boaz talking, so he could talk to the elders of the city and get them to respond to him, to what he has to do here. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, Buy it before the inhabitants, and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is none to redeem it besides thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. So we have this, what's his name, coming, and whether he knew, I'm sure he knew he was a kinsman of Naomi's, and whether he knew he should be a redeemer or not, I don't know, but it seems that he was able to answer Boaz pretty quickly. He says, yeah, I'll redeem it. And he thought it was going to be the parcel of ground, the field that Naomi owned. Naomi was probably to the place where she had to do something because of the poorness of her family. And so she probably wouldn't be able to keep that land any longer. And the reason that God has set this in order that it would stay in the family, is that when the children of Israel went into Canaan, they gave the tribes each a certain area of land, and that was to be theirs in that family. And if anything would ever happen that that land would be sold, it was to go to a kinsman to keep it in that family. But if not, then it could be sold, but yet it would come back to the original owner after the year of Jubilee. That was 50 years. So when a person would purchase a piece of land, they would pay accordingly to how quickly the 50 years would be up. If it was, they would purchase that land, say 45 years before the year of Jubilee, they would pay a pretty good price for that land. But if they would purchase that land 2 or 3 years before the year of Jubilee, they wouldn't pay nearly as much, because they knew after the 2 or 3 years they would have to give it up and it would go back to the original family. And then they would start over again. And that's the way they handled the land in Israel, and tried to keep it within the families that God had originally given the land to. All right, I don't kind of forget where I was at before I got off on that. But
To the point where Boaz was talking to the elder.
anyways, well, the kinsman said, yeah, I will purchase the ground. But he did not know all the details of what went along with purchasing this ground. He thought he was going to get more land, which that was going to be a good thing for him. And so we go on and find out then what Boaz has to say. Then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. Now this was the manner of the former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing, for the confirm and to confirm all things. A man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. So when the nearest kinsman redeemer says, I cannot purchase this ground and also take Ruth to be my wife, he says to Boaz, you go ahead and purchase the ground. And in doing that, he took off the shoe of his foot and gave it to Boaz. And this was, I suppose, like today, we would sign a deed or a contract. But then they would take off their shoe and give it to this owner who was to purchase it. And that one writer spoke of that when they took their shoe off, then they had no more right to ever step on that land, because it was not theirs to have any part with. So they had no rights to step on that land or to be a part of that land. And so he was concerned, because I think he probably had a family. And if he would have purchased this ground and also taken Ruth, and Ruth would have children, the children would get the inheritance in the end. And so he thought that was going to be a loss for him. And evidently he wasn't concerned about Ruth and Naomi that much personally. And so he reneges on his duty to be the nearest kinsman redeemer and to do the responsibility that was his. And so he gives it back to Boaz and takes off his shoe and gives it to Boaz and says, this is yours to do with as you please. And Boaz said unto the elders and unto the people, Ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's, and all that was Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren. And from the gate of his place ye are witnesses this day. So when Boaz sat in the gate that morning, he called the 10 elders, and there was other inhabitants around the town that came upon this, and they were a part of it also. And they were all then witnesses that the nearest kinsman redeemer was not going to do his part responsibility to take the land and also to be responsible for Naomi and Ruth. And so he gives it over to Boaz, and Boaz this is what he was hoping for in the first place. But notice how Boaz, he didn't do anything to try to undercut or to cover up. He did it all the way it should have been done. And God would be pleased with that. And so it turned out the way Boaz was certainly hoping that it would, and certainly the way that hoping that Naomi and Ruth was hoping too, that it would turn out. Now, this is a good story. You know, some of the writers say it's kind of boring, but it's a good story. But what do we find in this, I guess, in a spiritual content for us from the book of Ruth? What did some of the things you think of in this book as we studied it spiritually that you think God would use for his people and for us today to consider and to think of?
Yeah. Claire, wasn't Ruth in the lineage that the family that Jesus was born in? I think that's why God, she was a Moabite. She wasn't even an Israelite. And she came from that land. And boys had gone over into that land. I think it was a famine or something, wasn't it? They went over and worked in that Moabites. And then Naomi was one of the women that one of the women that I think married. But then, she came over into wherever the Israelites was at that time. I don't know. And so she stayed there with Naomi instead of going back like the other wives did. They went back to their homeland and whatever. But
well, you're going back to our lessons that we had previously.
yeah.
And yes, Ruth does end up being in the lineage of the Messiah, but first of all, she was of the lineage of David. Ruth becomes the great-grandmother of David.
Yeah.
I think it is that Ruth has Obed, and Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David. And then, of course, we know David's lineage all the way through it comes to the Messiah also. So, yeah, it's something the way Scripture takes things and the way God has done.
Well, I think this is the second time, at least I can remember, just real quick, that God has taken an outcast, like he did the Samaritan story, and now we have the Moabite lady, to show us that he's not prejudiced against people of maybe of not his chosen or whatever it might be. So that might be a little lesson.
She was one of the few women in the Bible that there's been a lot of scripture about. Usually women are kind of mentioned and maybe given a name and maybe not even given a name. They aren't very prominent in the scriptures compared to all the other.
Well, there was something one of the writers spoke to, that women didn't even inherit the land.
No.
It went to the men folks. Rhonda?
So then if the women didn't inherit the land, who would have Boaz paid when he purchased the land and then purchased Ruth? Who did he pay Naomi, or was there actually a financial transaction there, or?
I don't know that. I don't know if there was or not, because it was still, once Boaz marries Ruth, they're all in the family.
Right.
And Boaz took care of Ruth, or Naomi. And we think of Boaz's age too. He was an older person than what Ruth certainly was. He calls her his daughter, oftentimes here in the scripture. And so I would guess that.
She'd be more of a daughter-in-law, I would guess. Married is.
But I was thinking of the age. There's an age difference there. And
It doesn't give how old he was when he passed, does it?
no, but one writer spoke, they didn't think he probably lived, a great time after the children were born.
How many kids did they have,
Don't know.
except the one that was mentioned?
I don't know.
I think it's interesting to note that Ruth was a Gentile. And if you were a good Jew back then, you wanted a pure lineage to your Messiah. And Ruth wouldn't fit in that.
I also admired Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, who was her mother-in-law, and the fact that they made this entire trip together. And there was times where Naomi said, "Just leave, just go. I don't want to continue on." And Ruth would be there to support her. And Naomi just lost family. You'd think that'd be very difficult. But Ruth was there to support her, and then Naomi returned the favor when they made it to their destination and helped support her. That was admirable, I think.
Good point. Yeah. I think too is interesting here where it says all of the people in Bethlehem knew that Ruth was a virtuous woman, and even her being a Moabitess, there didn't seem to be prejudice there that she was an outsider, an outcast, but they realized and understood that she was a virtuous woman, and so she was very honorable and very trustworthy.
Why that she also encouraged that idea, because she worked right along with the lowly workers and everything like that, and so that again is another lesson of what our outward appearance will show us how Christ-like we are also. we're trying to get spiritual.
She didn't demand any special help, did she? She was going to do her work and do it well. Anything else? I think here a couple of things that have been mentioned on that. Yes, Ruth was a Gentile, but Jesus isn't interested in people being Gentiles or Jewish people or whatever. He's interested in their hearts being turned over to Him. He's interested in us in our heart, that we give our heart to Him. Whether we're Jew or Gentile, it makes no difference. Whether we're a different color, it makes no difference. But Jesus is interested in us and in our hearts. And that's how we must come to Him.
We talked last week a little bit about a God thing. God did lead her to Boaz's field, because initially she didn't know that. But as John said, for it to be a God thing, it has to further on lead us to Christ, which it did lead, because Christ was born down through there. Did I say that right?
Close.
I did listen.
Okay, anything else? Your last chance to talk and speak up. All right. Thank you for your participation and have a great week.